Good evening, friends. Welcome to part 5 of our discussion, our reading and discussion of Excursions to the Spirit World. Frederick Sculthorp's 1961 account of his, what looks like previous 20 years of spontaneous and not so spontaneous OBEs from his armchair or his bed. And definitely a groundbreaking book of its day, no question. At the beginning of these accounts of travels to the spirit world, I stated that my intention was to bring back a true picture of life in the next world as seen by one still living on earth. As my description had to include so many and different states of existence, we can now see how some of the information given by returning spirits is also varied. This makes it difficult for those on earth who are trying to compose a mental picture of spirit life. During my 20 years of spirit travel, I have at times been amazed at this variety. I have seldom been to the same place twice, and each emits a different vibration which the sensitive spirit body at once notices. The only places I have visited regularly are those that concern me personally, such as my house, garden, or shop in spirit, and the surrounding district. The sensitivity of the spirit body is a very wonderful thing and seems to act like a natural feeler. When entering my house in spirit, it at once picks up my personal vibration, which impregnates the place. This is not visual recognition, as I have sometimes been projected to a room in my spirit house, and before realizing my whereabouts, I have at once known it to be my place. This impregnation of the owner's personality on a house in spirit is, I believe, the reason why my cats are sometimes there, as it is also home to them. The cats do not seem to alter much. They take things quite calmly, still self-contained, and sometimes rather aloof, and keep me in my place. When I was a boy of about 10 years of age, I had a guinea pig, and I'm afraid I had quite forgotten it until recently, when in my house in spirit I heard a squeaking and found it walking all over the books in a corner of the room. Those who have owned guinea pigs will be interested to know that it has now stopped eating. It has progressed. The particular state in which my shop is situated in spirit is what I will call, for the present purpose and comparing it with a town in this country, as normal. It is peopled by those who have not been long in spirit. As to how long, I am not prepared to say, as progress differs. They have found their feet and are settled for the time being. It is a pleasant existence, as the earthly worries of living and getting a living are past. This is the reason for many of the cheerful messages received from those in this state. Cheerful. Cheerful, cheerful, cheerful. That's spirits most of the time. Except for the ones that are really deeply exploring, and then they're kind of mystical and mysterious. And the ones in the lower realms, which are, grumpy, bad-tempered, resentful, envious, angry, all that kind of stuff. My shop in spirit is not a replica of the one on earth, as it is different and larger, but it contains the same sort of goods, such as books, stationery, and greeting cards. At times there would be 2 or 3 young lady assistants, and these I know as spirit acquaintances, but I did not know them on earth. No money is given for goods, and one is glad to give a service. On the other hand, the customers would give a service in their own particular sphere of interest, and so it is the case of helping one another. Once I idly glanced at the periodicals in my shop in spirit, and noticed that one was called The Popular. When I was back in the physical body, I remembered that this was published on Earth about 1926. It was a boy's book, so apparently some of the books are etheric replicas of those once on Earth. That is the case. I can vouch for that. My shop in spirit is also an open house for visitors, and some months ago when out of body at night, I was there and showing visitors into the back rooms. As they were passing me, I sensed that they were past relatives whom I did not know on earth. I was not taking particular notice of them as one man passed with his face turned away. I suddenly sensed the personality of my father. Excitedly, I said, "Why, hello, Dad. I didn't recognize you at first." He laughed, and I saw that he was in his progressed form, with fine features and the same height as myself. Mind you, he was shorter on earth. Previously, when meeting me in spirit, he had generally assumed a more earthly appearance, but this time he apparently tested me and tried to get by. But my sensitive spirit body had detected the ruse. As a rest or little respite from the lower states, my guides, knowing my fondness for the country scene, often took me to a natural pool in a forest in spirit. I was at first taken there in the dream state, and I followed a long winding path through the wooded country until reaching a depression in the forest where there was a pool fed by a spring. When I was taken there in the conscious state, I knew every twist and turn of this path and what to expect. I was often taken to this pretty place, and it appeared to be seasonal, as sometimes the rushes bordering the pool would be tall, and other times quite short, and other marginal plants in their prime. These seasons did not agree with our calendar, nor was there any winter, and I went there so many times I knew every clump of trees, glade, and clearing in the woodland walk so well that I regarded it as my pool. My wife and I were walking along the bank of a river where there was a line of moored boats. As we were passing one of them, my wife quietly remarked, "There is your boat." "Mine?" I inquired. "Oh, yes," she said. It was a serviceable-looking motor cabin cruiser, not new, but could be described as one owner, carefully used, etc. As I was going to inspect it, I was drawn back to the physical body. I am still waiting for the opportunity to inspect my boat. At least he's honest, there's something to be said for that. I have a daughter in spirit who passed over in 1950, and on one occasion I had been projected and was walking with her through a lovely meadow. It was quite a pastoral scene with sheep here and there, and clumps of flowers. When my daughter stopped to pick one, I noticed that they were clover, but not the usual red or white variety. Each bloom had rings of different colors from top to bottom. They were soft pastel shades, giving a beautiful rainbow effect, and when near them I felt a certain happiness which could not have been entirely due to my pleasure in seeing them. In one part of the field I saw a sheep that was squatting down with head up and its eyes open widely in a sightless stare. It seemed to be enveloped in a watery haze and was completely shorn. Surrounded on the grass was a ring of white substance, and outside this was a circle of sheep, also squatting, who also looked very contented and serene. I sensed that this central sheep was a new arrival in spirit, and that the surrounding sheep were induced by higher minds to be there as some comfort when it became conscious. I felt something sad about it, something about its treatment before passing, and I did not want to know more. My daughter had a rather wide love for animals, and now seems to be enjoying it to the full. I was once with a medium friend who was relaying a conversation from my daughter. One passage that mystified us both was, "Dad had seen me with the porcine." I asked for an explanation, but the medium said, "She won't say, she laughs it off." So I had to look porcine up in the dictionary. It was quite right. I had met her in spirit once and found that she had made friends with a little pig, which was trotting happily by her side. It is nice to know that animals can reach a state of peace and happiness, and it also gives pleasure to see their response to a little sincere affection. This is mutual, and as I have tried to explain before, what affection is given out is returned many times in spirit. Those who are inconsiderate to animals may spend quite a time after passing over in a self-inspection, as the spirit body and its aura retain all incidents of earth life. Self-disgust can be very real and delays progress. All of which is true, and not just in the case of people who are inconsiderate to animals. People are inconsiderate to almost anybody, animals included, can have a long period of self-introspection afterwards. So I wouldn't limit it like that. Sometime after her passing, my daughter told me that she had been visiting many of the countries on earth and had sometimes been appalled and saddened by the awful conditions under which some had to live, and said, "I would not like a dog to live in it." Later, referring to this, my spirit teacher said, "She now has more compassion in her heart for people. Why? Because she has seen for herself so much cruelty meted out to humans and dumb creatures, and having seen, her compassion is great and deep. Link up this compassion with the great soul and master who once walked the earth and filled his heart with compassion. Brother, only those who have experienced can have true compassion. Your daughter has been much concerned and has learned her lesson well." Well, that links incarnation with the development of compassion, as far as I can see. And it's true. One does develop compassion through seeing suffering, and the daughter seeing it through traveling about as a spirit and looking at various countries that she would not be able to have traveled about in her pre-1950 life, when, let's face it, people didn't travel that much. And if they did, it was usually 30 miles. But it's also an argument for incarnation as, the prime motivator in developing all sorts of qualities, not just compassion. And that's what we're here to do, to experience and develop all sorts of things, all sorts of qualities, all sorts of attributes, the full range, not just the nice goody-goody stuff. Unfortunately, a lot of spiritualists would like us to think that, and I don't agree. There's just as much room for bad guys as good guys, if you want to get simplistic about it. And in fact, if there was no bad guys, what would the good guys have to do? Not much. And that's a point that's often forgotten in our rush to be kind, compassionate, merciful, and sweet-hearted. The word progress has been used a good deal, and it might give the impression of people swatting hard to pass an examination. I'm laughing because I've just been watching high school students near where I live swatting hard to pass examinations, and joking around with each other when they can't be bothered. This is not so. In the pleasant state of the spirit I have just mentioned, progress would consist in seeing new wonders and finding personal powers that came as a pleasant surprise, like unexpected presents or gifts. My daughter, after passing over, told me that she had to use paints and brushes in the usual way when painting a picture, but later learned to project the colors direct onto the canvas by thought. More recently, she has been with a group where colored rays are used on children. Although there is no pain with the spirit body, some defects appear to be carried over at first, as they are held by the mentality by force of habit, and the correct ray has an effective power to correct them. Now, of course, we've covered this in many other readings. The painting by the old-fashioned brush method, and then the projection of thought from the end of a stick or the end of a finger. And so that just confirms it. But, we can always use more confirmation, can't we? We're looking to build up a big picture here. And the more contributions we have, the better and more complete it gets. Arrival in a bright sphere has a much better effect on the spirit body than a lower plane. There is more tranquility and people are more leisurely. Thoughts are pleasant and often in unison, as I often picked up the thoughts that were with groups, such as sightseeing and holiday making. There was no illusion, and they were beginning to taste the sweets of spirit in the expectation of new wonders and interests. I was taken to a holiday resort in one of these states where people were sitting on a fine sandy beach and a band was playing. Others were surf bathing, and out at sea there were sailing boats. All interests seemed to be catered for on this plane by the advanced spirits in charge, and people were able to see that things that were perhaps they had no opportunity of seeing on Earth. Well, yes, yeah, that's pretty much it. Advanced spirits who are very good at the creative thought method create little communities and societies and landscapes, and then younger spirits come along and experience them. Sort of like Dad building a treehouse for the kids, before they're born. Then they go and they think the treehouse has been there forever. There were many museums and exhibitions, and these particularly interested me. There were no glass cases, and everything was open because there was no decay or dust or things that could be handled. One hall I entered contained all kinds of tools, instruments, and machinery. Many of the tools, gauges, and things which I did not understand were laid out in their cloth-like cases and seemed to be something special in their class, and I noticed many men inspecting them. In the middle of the hall were larger machines like presses, pumps, and generators. In one museum which showed the progress of inventions, I was interested in an old phonograph record, a wax cylinder which had been cut down to its length to show the depth of the soundtrack. As I handled it, I was impressed to find that I could sense its subject. It was a humorous monologue about a dog that ran off with its master's false teeth and seemed to have been made in a period when false teeth, or the mention of them, could easily cause laughter. This automatic psychometry by the spirit body of a spirit object is strange, and I understand that many objects in spirit are in some way the etheric counterparts of earthly objects, and thus carry the same vibrations and impressions. One particular room had on show different types of radio apparatus. Don't forget, this is like nearly 100 years ago. No computers then. There was plenty of humour in spirit, and I noticed that one wireless set had a notice remote control. It was a Heath Robinson affair with a crude wooden pulley with a much knotted driving band of string passing out of the window. I was once taken to a small library in spirit, the very atmosphere of which induced a feeling of ease and quiet study. There was a thick carpet and 4 or 5 deep armchairs, and the cases contained beautifully bound books. When I approached these volumes, I felt a strong emanation of their contents, which was a spirit truth, and I would have liked to have handled them, but as 2 people were reading, I quietly withdrew. Model makers seem to keep their interests and would no doubt find their work much easier than on Earth, after learning how to manipulate the mind stuff. In one man's workshop, I was shown a miniature fair with swings, roundabouts, all working. It just about covered the palm of my hand. I saw some boys playing with boats of all kinds in a pond. They were very fine models, perfectly to scale, with all the small details that model makers try to reproduce. One boat looked strange to me. As I stepped forward to inspect it, I walked into the water, and the thought crossed my mind that I had ruined my trousers. Looking at the boat, I sensed medieval. Then stepping to the back, I was surprised to find that my boots and turnips were perfectly dry. I meant to examine spirit water more closely, but always forgot. I think the feeling of wetness in spirit is an expected thought. The dryness of spirit water has its advantages, as I once saw some young men who, returning from a trip on a river in their sailing dinghies, simply stepped into the water, which was waist deep, to maneuver their boat to the bank. My spirit helpers, knowing my earth interests and hobbies, often took me to see the same things in spirit. Once, after looking at the autumn crocus in my garden on Earth, I was on my next projection taken to a park in spirit and landed near a clump of these flowers. These were fine specimens about 18 inches to 2 feet high. There were many varieties of plant life. In one section of this park, I saw the strange-looking ferns and palms of the pre-ice age, and mounted as a showpiece beside the path was a long neck and head of a diplodocus, which was made to weave and roar in a realistic manner. A small child was standing by and looked quite interested, but not in the least alarmed. Fear, which is a low vibration, could not occur in this state. After the passing of a distant relative, I was taken to the house that had been prepared for her in spirit. In one of the rooms, I met my father, and we were talking, and he said, "Look," and pointed to the wall. I thought he was referring to the wallpaper, and then I noticed the outline of a figure. It grew into the form of my mother. She was looking tense and serious through the concentration necessary to make herself visible to us on this wavelength. When she was fully formed, she smiled and stepped forward and greeted us. She looked very young, between 20 and 25 years of age, although she passed over at the age of 74, and I sensed that she was now in a higher plane and had to manifest in this way. I was shown over the house and later saw my mother again in one of the rooms. She was bright and happy and said it was time for her to go. Then, laying down on a couch, she said goodbye, and as I sat by her head and watched her disappear, why, my. I did not feel at all sad at her going, as her ability to contact me seemed so easy and natural. During a later projection, as I was watching some children playing in a field, my mother came to me again. She had more of an earthly appearance this time and told me that the relative mentioned was very worried over her house on earth. I knew that she was very attached to the house and she had to leave behind it, and with much regret. And later on earth, when I made inquiries, I learnt that her sons were selling it as they did not wish to keep it on. Attachment. And of course, we see the mother concentrating, focusing on trying to manifest on the slightly lower plane where the funeral, or what are we talking about? Celebration, being prepared for her in spirit. That does seem to be the case for people that are, fairly recent arrivals. They want to manifest on a lower plane. It's a bit like a ghost trying to manifest here. They have to make an effort, they have to focus, and it can be quite hard work, which often leads to the explanation that ghosts manifest to us on this plane for short times because it's just too hard to do it longer, basically. That's even if they get help from guides. It takes a lot of focus. It doesn't take so much focus to fiddle about with the plumbing or the electrical systems, which is why we see that so much. Or, drop little tiny white feathers. That's a manifestation that's easy. But a manifestation of an entire body, even if it's a spirit body, is something to practice and something to behold. Once I visited a place in spirit that appeared to be a nice residential suburb and was directed to one of the houses. As I entered the gate and neared the door, the couple were leaving. They nodded to me as they passed, and although I did not recognize them, I knew at once that this place was a sort of open house to people who are spiritualists when on earth. I looked in one of the rooms and saw a group of people, but they were all strangers except one, and she was the elderly lady who once saw me leave the body during the circle. This lady had a remarkable gift of objective clairvoyance and could describe a spirit in great detail. She once described a spirit, a man in Arab clothes who was with me, but said that she could see that he was not an Arab, but Lawrence of Arabia. And then passed on to a message that, although she did not know it, had once proved to be that it was indeed Lawrence. And let's not forget that book by Jane Sherwood that we read from many episodes ago, Postmortem Journal. I think I read 2 or 3 chapters. is a channeling of the spirits and the spirit experiences of Lawrence of Arabia. You may have to really go back into the archives to find that, but it's there. It was only about a year since this old lady had passed over, and she looked very serene and comfortable. There was no plane of illusion clinging to her mentality, and she said, "Hello, Mr. Sculthorp," in her usual manner when she saw me. I would have liked a long conversation with her, but a silly earthly habit I have of being reserved when among strangers prevented me, and I kept silent. Interesting that he would repress himself in that way. Fascinating, really. When he's out there, gathering experiences and situations to talk about, he would do that. Fascinating. This reserve or shyness is quite absent when I am on a higher plane. Minds are then much more in contact, and I do not remember ever being formally introduced to anybody. When meeting anybody or with a group, we all seem to know each other, and with an introduction, it would be as unnecessary as introducing brothers and sisters to each other. I looked over the house and then went out to see the district. The place seemed to be the etheric counterpart of the suburban part of a town in this country, and there was a shopping centre nearby. There's the shopping centres again. I imagine that'll make quite a few people happy, and others may be a little depressed because there's not a lot of hymn singing and praising the Lord. But there is that too. There's all aspects of life are represented there, all of them. There was also an arcade or row of shops in white concrete which looked new, and above these on the big facade was the name Roseway in a large red capital. It would be interesting to know if this shopping centre was also the spirit replica of a place on earth. When I was walking in front of this place, I saw an Eastern man. He had the high, wide-buttoned tunic and the small black fez type of hat, and when he saw me, he looked a bit apprehensive and got out of my way. I suppose I didn't look quite solid enough for his liking. I made my way back to the house, but when I got to the road, I could not at first recognize the spiritualist's house, and I walked along looking at house names on the wooden gates. I remember doing that, walking down rather quaint rows of houses with wooden gates set in trees and stuff with just a grassy walk in front. There's a lot of that. I was surprised to see on some of the gates and beneath the present name the faint outlines of names that previous occupiers had used. These outlines were not superficial paint impressions, but deeply embedded in the wood, and I was impressed that this was one more faculty of the spirit body, i.e. the ability to see the result of thoughts impressed upon the wood by previous painters. However, I still could not recognize the house, and a little girl pointed it out to me. This little girl must be my right-hand man, as she often appears when I'm stuck, and then, just as mysteriously, disappears. Now there's an interesting spirit guide for you. Is somebody faking it just for a good lark, or are they really a little girl who is either, well, I don't suppose it'd be somebody that just died. It'd be somebody that can, if they could manifest and demanifest, quickly and easily at just the right time. That sounds like an advanced spirit to me. When I entered the house, I became unconscious, but was not taken back to the body at once. I believe that this was done by my helpers to cast off my earthly reserve and to enable me to converse freely with the people in the house, including my elderly friend. Regarding the etheric counterpart of places which are, or once were, on Earth, I had a strange experience connected with this in one of my early projections. I had been left in a street which I sensed was London, and I was impressed that I would meet my wife and that she would be in the house facing the end of the street in which I was walking. I then became very conscious and happy. And the scene was crystal clear. The houses appeared to be in a style built about 1850, and at the end of the street I saw the nameplate stating that it was Granger Street. As I reached the house, the door was opened by my wife. It was a very happy meeting. We had been talking for a while in the hall when my wife suddenly looked concerned and said, "Your time is up." How do spirits know that stuff? Is it because you start to fade? I think it is. Wishing to prolong our meeting a little, I grasped her hand and said, "Don't go yet." But as usual, the unalterable rule intervened and I was taken back to bed. A few days later, I attended a circle, and a lady opposite me was controlled by a spirit, a lady who leaned forward and spoke to me in a typical Cockney tone. She said, "I was there when you met your lady a few days ago, and don't you want her solid, like?" After the circle, I asked the medium about this spirit, and she said, "She often speaks through me. She lived near the Old Kent Road in London, got intoxicated at a wedding, and was killed by a fire engine when crossing the road." For some reason, that makes me think of John Entwistle of The Who, when he died in a hotel room while they were on tour. And I went looking for him and I found him. And he'd just taken too much cocaine and booze, I think. And he just knocked his heart out and just, wasn't depressed. And was like, "Oh, geez, what did I do there?" I sort of explained it quickly to him. And as he came around and realized he was dead, Keith Moon sort of come walking in, and they went off laughing and joking together. I didn't have much to do with that one. I just had to sort of say, "Listen, sir, you have died. Mr. Entwistle." When I reached home, I looked up my London street directory. There was a Granger Street near the Old Kent Road. I was rather excited over this, as I was sure I could recognise Granger Street in the front of the house where I met my wife. I also noticed the style of the lettering on the nameplate on the street, and the following Sunday I rode over to the place. There was no Granger Street, but only a large area with great stacks of new bricks and building material. I asked a lady in a confectioner's shop nearby where Granger Street was. She pointed to the building site and said, "It used to be there, but it was demolished some time ago to make way for the new block of flats which are going to be built." I did not like to tell her the story that it still exists, but it will do so until it reaches the end of its etheric usefulness. Indeed, they do. There's a lot of that there too. That's a classic experience for sure. And I don't know if I've got enough time to read the next section about reading and motorcycling and spirits and shopping. But we'll get to that next time. And you see the normality of much of life over there. On certain levels, people love to live a slightly refined version of the life they live now, without all that, sweat and toil and trouble and worry that they had here, to do with bills and people's health and, that sort of a thing. Holding down a job that you maybe didn't like that much. And of course, one can progress beyond these states, but many millions of people do live this way. Many millions. And that's basically because they're happy living that way. They're fulfilled for quite some time before they, move on up through the levels to more mysteriously challenging lifestyles. But unless you get stuck in one of the lower levels, which most of you won't, this is the sort of area that you'll first step into, partly because of your comfort zone and wanting to continue your life as you know it and feel it and are comfortable with it, and partly because friends and family are there and you don't want to sort of disappoint them, even if your own inner spiritual journey has led you beyond such paltry satisfactions. You will do it out of kindness to them. And I've spoken to many people about this over the years who really kind of want to go to one of the more elevated heavens, which is fine, but they'll want to stop off here just for the sake of family and friends that will be there and would be disappointed if you didn't show up and acted all snotty and, angelic, like, "Well, I'm going on up here because I'm spiritually special." Anyway, I think you get the point there. And but I still feel I still get emails and queries from people querying that particular issue. And it's not such a big deal. You can live in one place and visit in another. It's, if you choose to live in a sort of astral plane monastery on high in the mountains and meditate lots, you can do that. But you don't have to get all hoity-toity about it. You can sort of take time off and go visit your family that are living one of these more normal lives, and just like you would do here on Earth. All these things are feasible and possible, and I suspect some of you will be doing that as you are drawn to the spiritual lifestyle. And let me cast no aspersions on those who would choose to meditate on the astral plane. I have done most so myself, and it is quite a marvelous experience. You get really high meditating there. You really do. And it takes you right to the edge of cosmic consciousness, and if you're not careful, you'll go right into it and sort of like disappear for a while. No, really, you will. Anyway, enough for now, and we'll get on to part 6 real soon. So long.